January, a convention called MAPL Annex 6, and particularly, if you look at the perspective of IMO, the strategy on reduction on greenhouse gas emissions took place, and it called for some adjustment of the shipping industry. So what shipping has done, when we look at the numbers, of course, it means that we're looking at 11% of the available containerized shipping, for example, being out of work. But when we look at it closely, we find that half of that are not ships that are generally out of work because of COVID, but ships that had already been taken out of work to undergo technological changes in retrofitting in something we call scrubbers. And this is to reduce air pollution, because this is generally what the changes for the IMO strategy on reduction on GHG was about. So we see that much of the unavailability of shipping is not necessarily all related to COVID. If we look at the 2.72% of the TEUs, I mean 2.7 million TEUs that are out of work now, some of them may be because of blank sailings, because of reduced capacity, but also half of them are because of that fitting in order to be able to meet the new regulations. So it's going, yes, to rearrange the markets because of the world realization that we can't depend only on one side or on one market. But then if you realize also, China was among the first nations to undergo the COVID pandemic, but also one of the first to recover. And we are seeing now that maybe shipping, from the statistics that are coming out from end of last month, maybe shipping underestimated or overestimated the lack of capacity, or rather the capacity that would not need, because China is already up. And also shipping, because of its reliance, the way we rely on it for for goods and emergency supply, it's already working, and that's why the world had to come up and put in measures under the guidance of World Health Organizations to ensure that shipping must continue, the ports remain open for business.
Now, since we're talking about ports and looking at the East African community, or other region, Mombasa Port plays a major role in as far as sea trade is concerned.
Yes.
So from where you sit, what are you doing to ensure that sea trade continues going through, especially with these disruptions that we're having? What measures have you put in place to ensure that we continue working?
As you're aware, Mombasa Port, as many others, has never closed. We've always remained in business. And therefore, one of the first things we did is, as the government, port community, private players, we came together and we realized that Ministry of Health has to take the lead, but also we must come up with protocols and a new way of doing business, ensuring that the ship does not become the interface through which COVID comes on land, or that the port becomes the means through which COVID goes into the ships. So we came together and came up with measures very quickly of how we are going to ensure that shipping continues with the minimum disruption as possible. Of course, part of that meant taking care and putting measures to ensure that, first of all, because it's a human disease, it's not cargo as such. So we put in measures that ensured that we knew and we put extra care on ships that came from COVID affected areas. We also looked at the human element, the seafarers, the health, their state of health. So therefore now there is extra requirement for the captain or the master to make sure that we have records, the health records, for example, temperature of all the people, the people that are on board. And this information, because shipping works a lot on information, prior information to the port, even before. You send information on cargo, you send information on the services that you need when you're coming, way before the bills of lading, the ownership of, so that you know, the port is ready to receive the vessel. So on top of this now, we need, and we've insisted that we must have the information on health. And then when the ship docks, there are certain protocols that must take place. Health must board first. They must issue a free, we call it free pratique, to say that the other people can go on board now. And then we also make sure that the seafarers or the crew are basically in quarantine, so that we reduce the interaction between the cargo workers and also the people who are on board the ship, so that we don't cross-infect.
Quite some measures there, but I'd want to understand with this Mombasa port operational, with mandatory inspection of vessels, as you've said, and following the health protocols, how has this impacted on port operations in terms of efficiency? Have you seen delays, and how have you dealt with delays, courtesy of this new directive or other protocols? Now,
based on the protocols that they were actually intended to reduce the delays. Some of the things that we used to do, of course, we've had to suspend. For example, in terms of the regulations, shipping works through regulation through what we call port state control. We also have flag state control and also coastal state control. When I talk of port state control, it means that you only catch the ship in terms of safety. If I may use the example of the road, when a car is driving, the traffic policeman has the right to stop it and check on it. Now, this doesn't happen on the ship, because the ship is at sea, there are no traffic policemen. So you catch the ship when she is in port. And therefore, surveyors from the Maritime Administration are obliged, as part of the international network and framework of keeping ships safe, they're obliged to board, check on the certification. Then the crew also, in terms of their training, in terms of the certificates they have. So one of the measures we've done with the guidance of the International Maritime Organization is to extend some of those certificates so that we reduce the necessity of people boarding and then having to interact with the crew and the masters and such. Then also the certificates for the seafarers, they are also time bound. The validity, depending on the age and the qualifications and whatever they have, that the skills they have to enable them to work on board ships. We had to issue a mariner's notice to inform international shipping that the certificates we've issued, we've basically given them an automatic extension, so that now the seafarers also don't suffer or lose their qualifications to be able to work on board ships. Now, one very important issue that I must mention is to do with the human element. Because with COVID, some of the measures that ports took is to prevent or to put a stop to shore leaves. If you know, shore leave means that when the ships come and they're doing cargo work, the crew then have an opportunity to come on land. We have a network of institutions, or rather, all over the ports. We've got what we call missions to seamen, and they are buildings or places set apart, basically in every port, run by NGOs, the church sometimes, so that the seafarer, to reduce homesickness
and seasickness in the event that they had to just be on ground.
Yeah, they are able to come on board, to come on shore, maybe get internet facility and contact their families. Also have some, recreation, rest and recreation. They are able to swim and
So have relax. You done away with this?
That has been done away with because of reducing the interaction. Yeah,
the ones on board and the ones on ground. I want just to understand is that has these protocols and measures that you've put in place, have they in one way or another, how have they affected cargo clearance at this point? Is it slow or is it at the same? And if it is, what are you doing to deal with this? Because we've also had an issue with
cargo clearance is a port
issue.
It's a port issue. Now, what COVID measures we've done, of course, is to reduce the interaction between the crew and whatever. But then now that you mentioned that, the port also has to make sure that their staff are not exposed. So we've seen, of course, reduced staff, because you have to look at the people who are vulnerable, put them out of harm's way. Yes. But then, with proper planning, and because a lot of it is automated and equipment and whatever, proper planning of people, the prior knowledge of who is coming and what they'll need, and putting effective measures in terms of equipment and operations. We have not, if you will remember, we've not had an issue with port congestion. Yeah. But like I was saying, the other issue that has been affected is crew change. Because ships, staff who work on board ships, under ILO and under IMO protocols that want to ensure the safety of the ship, the human element is very important.
That's very key.
Yeah, and therefore, in terms of hours of work, in terms of their welfare, and how often they get to go home, because you and I, when we work on land, we have the buffer zone that in the evening you'll go back home to your family, and it changes your mindset. But yes, when you're working on board ship, you are there 24/7. And therefore, it's the same people.
Agreed.
And then stress can really affect you. And therefore, we've got very time-bound working contracts. It's either 3 months for the very senior, topmost, or 6 months or 9 months, depending on the level. What has happened because of COVID, we've seen a lot of restrictions, not just in Kenya, but in ports around the world, in terms of onboarding and disembarking crew. But we are happy that recently the IMO has shown us the direction. We've got protocols, and Kenya, we are proud to have been among the very first ones to have come up with protocols that will now allow that to happen, because it was beginning to become a major problem.
A dicey situation. Now, when we talk away from now the human factor as far as shipping and maritime is concerned, now let's look at we've already talked about the suppressed demand of raw materials from China, and that this is taking a different direction from, globally. People are shifting as far as maritime and shipping is concerned. Now, let's talk about crude oil carriers. How are they, faring during this, disruptions that have been brought about by COVID-19?
Now, if you look at shipping, you're looking at different aspects of that, and some have been more affected than others. The demand for for fuel has reduced, yes, but we still need fuel. If you talk of areas like cruise shipping, that's not necessary, and it's been one of the most affected because of the reduction in travel and the control and the passengers. You don't want to go on a cruise when you're not sure about the situations that are happening. But in terms of oil, that is still on. In fact, I want to say that some of the crew, when we started our seafaring job creation, we got some of them on cruise, on oil carriers. Those ones haven't been affected, they're still working. The people we've seen coming back, because their jobs are no longer available, are the people we sent on cruise shipping. Yes. So
so crude oil, we should not be worried about transport. When you talk about crude oil, everyone goes in terms of fuel and all that stuff. That's a
that market.
Now let's just moving around the cruise industry, as you've said. Kenya has had different cruise ships landing on our ports. The NMS Nautica, I know it's very famous for that. We might
Queen
not
Elizabeth
see it. Yes, we might not see it this year. And you've mentioned that the people that you've seen come back home are the ones that you put on, the seafarers that you put on the cruise, cross ships. So what next for these young people?
Okay, at the moment they are on leave. Their contracts have just been suspended for those who hadn't finished, and for those who had not boarded, we're still on course, and we should see them going back. Now, like I said before, cruise shipping is shipping generally is a very resilient, has been or has proven to be a very resilient industry. And it may not be quick to change or to adapt, but it always does. And already we've seen the signs that it's going to come back. One of the issues that are happening, or the developments that we've seen happening, is issues around certification. Like I said, we've got flag state control and port state control. Now, flag state control means that the ship is under the control and the regulation of the country whose flag it's flying. And what flagships do, they rely on, first of all, the first line of action or defense is the maritime administration of the country where the ship is registered. Yes. For example, now Kenya Maritime Authority will be responsible for all issues affecting the ships on our flag. But because Kenya Maritime Authority is a maritime administration, or is a flag state, will not be anywhere where the ship goes, because ships follow cargo or follow their business. We've got classification societies, and IMO is very clear that the country can delegate to the classification societies, and a few have come up. If you look at the Lloyd's, if you know Lloyd's register, Lloyd's Classification Society. Yes. So what we have seen now, classification societies, and we've seen the first one being the German one, it's called DNV, GL, is already come up with a process of certifying the ships in terms of being disease-free and fumigating and whatever else, the health measures that need to be taken. And based on that, having come up with those protocols, we are seeing that one of their first clients, who is a cruise ship, is set to start business again in July, which means that we're already seeing the revolution that's going to be able to see measures in place that are going to ensure that confidence, particularly in the maritime, particularly in the cruise shipping industry, and therefore we are looking to see our crew go back. We hope there.
Good news there. Now, the pandemic has also, exposed glaring defects, or rather just missing links in the global supply chain, especially now given that China takes a huge bulk of that.
Yes.
Are we seeing dynamics? Are we changing? Is the maritime and shipping industry globally changing and trying, just to find another way? Because we've already seen glaring, we've been hell-bent on what China wants is what we give it.
Now, what I may say is that shipping is demand-driven, is a derivative industry, and of course it will follow the demand and the markets. Now, if we are going to see, because that's the sign now, that we are going to see a shift from the overemphasis in certain spots in terms of manufacturing and in terms of industrialization, if we see that the world is looking for alternative markets, of course that's going to affect the shipping industry, because it has to react to new routing, to new markets, to new demand spots. And it's still work in progress. And therefore, we may not say where it is. We are hoping, of course, even as Africa, we'll position ourselves to be part of that global supply chain. And we are yet to see how that is not an instant
coffee thing. Now, when Kenya hosted the Blue Economy Conference some years back, maritime and shipping was at the core and the center of that particular, step towards the right direction. As we stand looking into the future, I know with this project, the Seafarers Project has employed a lot of youth. But now, what else is the shipping and maritime industry, from where you sit, doing to ensure that we realize and we harness, the potential of the blue economy?
Okay, one of the things that we really found out that we must emphasize on, and that informed the entry of jobs through the cruise shipping, was skills development. Because one of the areas that we knew we could tap in quickly was the hospitality sector. We have a product, world renowned, through the training that we've done for our young people in terms of hospitality. Kenya has been the African, as it were, place where even the hotel industry in the continent come for. And that's why it made sense for us to target the cruise industry because for brand building, you know, for letting the world know that we've got young people who are able to work and are available to work in the shipping industry. Now, the next frontier, of course, it's in the technical areas, because now we've already got, you know,
people on board coming
out there is knowledge that you can crew from Kenya. Because for one, we've got what people generally call the youth bulge. We've got many young people, meaning therefore you can supply and keep supplying those people. Now, as you recall, one of the things that happened after the conference was the launch of Bandari Maritime Academy, in order to be able now to tap into the training of young people in the other areas, being able to produce and supply in large numbers the people who support the technical side of the ship. We've got now the hospitality side, and therefore what we are doing is coming up with programs that are work ready, that prepare the youth in work ready programs that enable them to go into the sea. And we're talking of being able to supply like air conditioning technicians, computer, and, you know, ratings. If you think of a ship as a factory, all the kind of skills that you need in a moving factory.
You kind of preempted what I wanted to ask, is that have you seen an upsurge since the launch of this particular program?
Yes.
Have you seen an uptake from young people wanting to fill in these positions, especially where shipbuilding and repairs are concerned, other than just, you know, working in the hospitality side of things? Have you seen that take up, you know,
when we started, I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding. Because the young people who are in the technical field didn't understand why we were doing that, why we were concentrating on who they called non-seafarers. Non-seafarers because they've only been in hotels or in other areas where they're the ones going into shipping. But the point, like I said, it was a brand building tactic, you know, to place Kenyans on a world platform, so that the shipping fraternity, because this is an industry that, you know, word of mouth is very, very important. If they know that Kenyans are available and they're good workers, then of course they'll come. And therefore, because of that, we've seen a very huge demand. Then, I mean, for the courses among the young people. Then what that did for us is that because of that reputation building, if you recall, early this year, before COVID struck, we had just got a very good partner in terms of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to take now the technical people. And those are the people I'm saying that the ones they recruited haven't come back. And in fact, just before the closure, we'd just done a major shortlisting exercise because they had said, we are coming back now. They started with officer level, but now they had just given us notice and indication that they were coming now to recruit the ratings. But as soon as we did that shortlisting exercise, COVID struck. But going forward, we are refitting Bandari College in terms of the mandatory equipment and, you know, structures that are required in order to produce internationally recognized certificated people. And we are also developing the curriculums that are needed. The mandatory certificates that we must get, because if we are targeting as many shipping activities as possible, not just cruise, not just oil, container shipping, ro-ro vessels, then we need to have a broad spectrum of certificates that are required. We've got 26 mandatory, and we are therefore looking to expand
that is on a point of policy. But now I'm looking at from a point of view as a parent or even a young person who, you know, is trying to just get their ropes. Questions as I ask that this is an opportunity, but how do I get on board? What do I require? Do I have to go through university? Or do I have to study a particular course so that I can come on board and get, you know, something on the value chain as far as maritime and shipping industry is concerned? Okay. So what do I need?
Now, what you need is first to understand that the ship, or rather the maritime sector, because there are those who don't want to wet their feet And that's what we tell them. Then you can work on shore, in the ports, in the cargo, in the transports, in logistics, marine insurance, the law. I'm a lawyer myself, although I'm working in the maritime sector. So there are many sectors, and it's an industry that's open to a lot of, you know, people and training. Now, when you leave that then you come to the idea, you know, to the understanding that, like I said, the ship is like a moving factory. You've got people at floor level, and you've got people at the mid level, and you've got people at the highest. Therefore, it means that from the university to the, you know, to the lowest trained, if I may say, the people who give up hope because they don't get the grades to get them to university. TVET institutions, hands-on skills, you know, very, very important. If you're able to do something with your hands, and that's the message I tell young people every time I have an opportunity, that the days when if you didn't get an A to get you to university, then you're branded a failure, those are long gone. And it doesn't happen in the shipping industry. And the beauty about this is you can start up at the floor and be able to get to the top, because it's incremental improvement of the skills that you get. Now, but the other thing I have to tell the young people who are watching me today, character, very, very important. Back in the old days, if ships, you know, it's like paramilitary, the command, you know, control in the ship, very, very important, because the safety and the security of the vessel depends on the people and the interrelationships of the people working on board. And therefore, haki yetu doesn't work on board.
You wouldn't have people picketing on the deck or below deck. No, you cannot
picket, because the safety of the ship depends on all of us working together. And therefore, that mindset is very, very important. The other thing I have to tell them is the attitude of work, you know, the approach to work. You must be ready, you know, to do more than is actually allocated to you. Because that's how, even with the young people that we sent already, that is who, when we see the grading that they are given when they come back there, because you have a seaman's book that records your conduct on board ship. And therefore, the reports we are seeing is hardworking, always helpful, always with a smile, you know, that to do, can do attitude, very, very important. But then I know I stepped on some toes once when I said this, English language. Now,
okay, elaborate on English language.
Maritime, all over, language is English. And if you go on board a ship made in Russia, if the manual is in Russian, there must be an English translation. So that's the universal language. And therefore, communication, how will you communicate with somebody? Because, for example, if we take the example of the bridge, that's where the navigation equipment takes place. You know, you get an order of what you're going to do. What move do you make? 2 degrees, whatever. If you don't understand, nobody will speak to you in Swahili or in your mother tongue. It has to be English, and you have to understand immediately, you know, what you're being told. And therefore, we are telling them, as they study, put an emphasis on the English language, because we had situations when we were recruiting. They must pass a computerized English test. And we had an incident where one fainted, because now he's passed the technical, but now he has to go and sit and do the English language from a computer. You log in, and the computer gives you instructions. If you don't understand, and you're not able to follow through, then of course it means you fail. And also, the way the language is structured, the language test is structured, is you go, it gets your level from the bottom, then you go level 2, okay, then proceed to level 2. Then it determines whether you'll be an officer, where you will work.
So at the end of the day, I need to be able to communicate in English.
To communicate in English and to comprehend and communicate in English. In the service industry, a second language will be a very huge boost for you, because if you're talking of the cruise industry, the guests could come from Japan, they could come from the Arabian countries, you know. So if you have Spanish, Italian, whatever, then of course your suitability for the kind of markets, or for the market that you go to work in, then may change. But in terms of the technical, you know, work, you must have the English language. And like for Bahri, when we were working with Bahri, the Saudi Arabia shipping line, they didn't come to Kenya. All the interaction, the interviews, the elimination, you know, in terms of who they will take, was all done online. So unless you can communicate and make yourself understood, then it means you don't get, you know, your leg inside the door. Of course, if you have the basic language, then you'll remain on the floor level. So I'm asking, and we are pleading with the young people. The phone, the telephone, the smartphone has really reduced our reading and our, you know, English language, because we have our own language there. We talk of my bad.
My bad, or I use an emoji.
You know, yeah. Use an emoji to say something. Or you know, you say this, that, whatever. We understand each other at our level as youth. But sadly, that won't get you on that level.
Certainly, I would actually want to understand why that gentleman, was it a gentleman or a lady who fainted, the technician? Yeah. Well, I would understand their frustrations, because you've done the hard part. And you've passed. Which is the technical part at first, but now I cannot comprehend and communicate in English. Yeah, so it's easy. Let them read more, write more, practice more, and it will come easily. It's just that we've become lazy because of the computers and the TVs. They say data is king, so if I can communicate on the internet, well, most people don't, you know, put in more work to just reading a book. They find it old-fashioned. You know, in the 21st century. Now, what are the future prospects for the maritime industry? Point to investments in artificial or rather intelligent freight technologies for monitoring, regulation, you know, facilitation and such. Is Kenya ready to jump onto this bandwagon? Okay, like I said, shipping revolutions take time, but they happen. And even before COVID, this was something, you know, when you talk of smart shipping, it's a revolution that is has been slowly creeping up on us. You know, if you take a note of the developments in the world generally, shipping has always relied on communication. If you think of sending the manifest in terms of what's loaded on the vessel, sending it prior to the ship's arrival, it's one of the conditions anyway of ships coming to the port of Mombasa. You must send your manifest within a given time. When you talk of sending the bills of lading now, everything has been going electronic, clearance of cargo and such things. And it makes sense when you look at where, you know, the world we are living now with satellite communication and communication with ships being almost real time. Is not like before when we had, you know, huge areas of the sea not covered, and when you couldn't even, as an owner of a ship, get in touch with your vessel or even the crew. Then we've got the other aspect is the cloud, the capacity to store a lot of data for, you know, for record keeping, for ship, you know, for even for research, for being able to plan ahead because you know now the history and how the behavior is. Then you talk of the smartphone, you know, being able to come up with apps that can do so much, and also the Internet of Things. And therefore, shipping is right in the mix of all that. And in Kenya, if I may say that we've got Kentrade, you know, the single window. This is something that IMO has really emphasized on. IMO has a convention called Facilitation of International Trade, and which seeks to reduce the amount of time the ship spends at sea. And therefore, one of the ways that is very important towards that is getting everything done on a single platform so that you reduce the number of the people who interact with the vessel, the documents they need, the compliance issues, and therefore you are able to do it all that. And as you know, that's one of the things that we've been able to do quite well. In fact, last week
we had our brothers from, I won't name, but one of the African countries come to Kenya, and we had a meeting on Friday because they want to learn from us, they want to implement, and they thought, they decided that Kenya is far ahead of us, and we had a very, very good meeting with them, and they were quite happy that, and they are ready now for us to lead them into that space.
That is good. Now we have some feedback here. A concerned Kenyan says, M. Wanja says, 3 months on, I'm yet to receive my goods that were coming via ship. Waziri Saidia. I don't know how she intends you to say but maybe she's just talking, she's pointing to the issue of delays.
Yes.
And I don't know,
because of the, because of the, like you said, the market and the shift, ships have had to, like when we used to get ships direct from China, now, of course, a ship owner will look at the cargo. How much is it? So when you hear of sometimes blank sailings, because the market or the goods do not justify me taking this route, and therefore it takes a more circuitous route. But we can be able to check, she can check with Kenya Maritime Authority, Commercial Shipping Division, to get some professional advice on that.
Right. Yeah. M1J, you've heard that you need to check with the Maritime Authority so that they can give you direction in regard to that particular, shipment that you had. 3 months, well, there's so many other things and other challenges that may be going through other than just COVID or different, it will be explained to you on that particular page. So then someone else here says, with seasick, I get seasick.
Seasickness.
Yes, I get seasick. Actually, I mean, they've written, I get seasick.
Okay.
But I want to be employed in the maritime and shipping industry. Like can I get over seasickness? I think they want to know if it's something that you can get used to. When you say 9 months on board a ship, or 6 or 3.
I want to encourage them first that people have done it. Even people who start off with seasickness and they've overcome it, they can do it. But then, like I said, you don't have to wet your feet to work in the maritime sector.
You can work offshore.
You can work offshore.
I think the way this person is writing is that they are maybe targeting, it sounds exciting, especially to be on a cruise, different ports. There's that time to shore leave and all that stuff. You get to see
like I
so
tell
much.
them, it's seeing the world on somebody else's pocket, because the ship owner lifts you from here to US to join ship and lifts you back. You can take your holiday anywhere you want. And the other thing I may mention is that, like I said about shipping revolutions happening, over time, and us adapting, having to adapt. Because of what COVID has done, and the stress and the agony that it's caused the seafarers, we are likely to see, one of the predictions is that because of the hardships, salaries may go down, but that's relative, like I tell people. Then it may stop being attractive for some people. We've seen this, because seafaring has gone in cycles. It started in Europe, for example. Initially, the seafarers came from Europe. But with time, in terms of technological changes and, with internet and being able to work from home and making as much money, entertainment industry, it shifted to, Asia. And we're looking to shipping now, or rather seafaring, coming to Africa. And therefore, salaries are relative, because based on the GDP, if someone, if I may mention, someone who is a swimming pool attendant earning $1,200 on ship, that's relative, because in some jurisdictions it will be very little money, but for us it's a lot of money. And therefore, I want to urge my upcoming seafarer to read up more and
I think
get resilience.
When the president was launching this particular project, I think Kenyans were amazed, and 80,000
for the
beginner, 80,000 gross.
That's for the cleaner.
That's a cleaner. Yeah. So here, be encouraged. You've DM'd me and just saying that you're seasick, but you still want to work in the maritime and shipping industry. And from the way you're writing here is that you are looking at the cruise industry rather being top deck, just moving from one place to another. Madam Pierce here has said that seasickness is something you can overcome, but you might also get an opportunity if that doesn't happen and you still are ready to work, but you do not necessarily have to wet your feet.
And tell him that he doesn't have to share his meals with the fish. Fish are well fed, so he can.
Yes, you do not have to share your meal with the fish, as Madam Pierce has said that. Yeah. Now, in conclusion, Madam Pierce, we see that the transport industry is one of the sectors that is going to be taking the lion's share of Ukur's Yatani's 2.7 trillion budget for the fiscal year 2020-2021. What are your expectations from where you sit?
Yes, getting enough to kit the sector to deliver. But having said that, let me also say that the biggest investments we can make in this country and which we are looking to make is in skills development for our young people, because these are regulated sector. You can't walk from the street into the vessel. You have to go through a very detailed and very prescribed skills development and certification program. So unless we have the basics that are required, because you imagine that you're training somebody to work on land, but you're training them on land, but they must have an idea of what it takes or what to expect when they get on board the ship, which means therefore you must be able to simulate to them and make it as real as possible on land what they're going to face when they get on at sea. So investments in capacity building, that's the first thing we must look at. But that said, some of the issues that we need to put in place may not necessarily be, capital driven, because we're talking of integration of policies in order to drive the maritime sector. Being able to look at, when we talk of blue economy, I tell people that it's a mindset. Blue economy is thinking and bringing everybody together at the table to be able to give and take. Because sometimes we look at short-term gains, but forget to look at the bigger picture. And therefore, it's sitting around the table, coming up with trade-offs, that today I may forego, for example, taxation in this area in return for being able at the long run to reap maximum benefits. I may use as an example something called bunkering. Bunkering is the fueling of ships, basically. And it takes a lot of give and take. It will take a lot of give and take for us to be able to develop Mombasa as a bunkering center. Not just to be able to do it for the sake of it, but for the ripple effects that are attendant to it. For one, being able to lower our freight rates, because if ships are avoiding to come and take bunkers in Mombasa because of our fiscal regulatory regime that we have, which pushes the prices higher, it hurts us in terms of freight, because then a ship owner will be able, will do his math, and when they do the voyage calculations, and he's in it for the money. He's made an investment, and he wants to make as much money as he can.
Profit, yes.
Yeah, profit, yeah. If he looks and sees that if I buy in Mombasa, then I don't have the profit margin reduces. But if I buy in Singapore or in Dubai, then it means I can make more money. But what does that do to us as a country? It means that he carries fuel for the in and out.
Yes.
Voyage.
We miss out on the business.
What does that mean? We miss out on the business he could have brought to Mombasa to buy, but then we also miss out on the cargo space, because it means he cannot carry beyond a certain weight. It means then he will reduce the cargo carrying space or capacity, and then your freight and mine get more. So I'm looking at this as, give and take, and being able to leverage on the economics and getting more. But then also we've made profit on the freight, because the freight rates will reduce, and therefore inflation and cost of goods landed, will go down. But then also we'll be able to leverage on other businesses that come with that. There'll be the supplies, because if I'm taking bunkers in Mombasa, I might as well take food, provisions for my crew, which means Wanjiko, who is farming fruits and cabbage and carrots and eggs and chicken, is also able to supply. Based on that also, if I'm coming to take bunkers in Mombasa, why don't I do my crew change in Mombasa as well? So the crew that I'm changing will disembark in Mombasa. They may go on holiday, because it's an opportunity to be in Kenya. They may go on safari, which means there is a tour operator there making money. KQ will be able to lift that crew to whatever destination he's going. But then again, the crew who is coming to join the vessel will